The chandeliers threw warm light across crystal and roses as the room held its breath. Forks hovered in midair. Napkins lay folded like white birds along the table's edge. My father stood at the microphone in his tuxedo, the kind smile he wore for strangers fixed across his face. He lifted a glass of champagne and turned toward me with that familiar warning gaze that always meant I was about to be volunteered for something I never agreed to. "Tonight," he said, voice ringing off the ballroom walls, "my eldest daughter has chosen a beautiful gift." Chairs scraped lightly as 200 people angled to see me. The string quartet fell into a gentle hush, bows dangling against their knees. My sister, Amelia Vale, lifted bouquet, cradled, looked from my father to me, confusion flickering behind her lashes. Somewhere behind the bar, a bucket of ice cracked like thin lake ice in January. My pulse kept time with the tiny fracture. "My daughter, Lacey," my father continued, drawing out my name like a ribbon. He enjoyed pulling, "has decided to gift her lakefront property to the newlyweds as they begin their life together." A soft murmur went through the Wellington crowd, the kind that says, "How generous," even before the facts arrive. My mother placed a hand over her necklace and smiled as if everything were unfolding exactly as planned. I watched it happen in slow detail, the lie taking shape in public, the trap sprung with crystal and applause. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been pushed into doing the right thing for someone else's image, tap that like button, share this with someone who'll understand, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next chapter. But to understand why that announcement felt like a hand on my throat, you need to know where the pressure started and what that lake house really meant. I grew up in a home where love arrived with caveats and a ledger. My father, James Anderson, ran dinner like a board meeting and birthdays like performance reviews. The family order was understood before we learned long division, dad at the head, Amelia at his right, my mother smoothing napkins and tempers, me catching the crumbs of whatever patience remained. When I brought home good grades, he nodded without looking up. When Amelia joined debate and smiled the way he smiled, he clapped so hard the silver rattled. My mother, Diana, had a soft voice and an endless supply of "let it go-s." She loved us the way a person loves fragile china dusting, arranging, never using anything for its real purpose. When Dad criticized my hair, she suggested highlights. When he called my ideas hobbies, she asked whether I'd tried Pilates. She believed in peace like it was a religion, even when the offering plate passed my way every night. My grandmother, Catherine, believed in something else entirely. She lived 3 hours from Seattle in a cedar-sided craftsman that faced a broad sweep of lake and sky. Her porch smelled like lemon oil and old books, and the kitchen clock ticked loud enough to drown out anyone's temper. With her, my thoughts were not too much. My quiet, not attitude. My hunger for computers, not a phase. We planted tomatoes that leaned toward the morning sun and read business profiles aloud from magazines saved under the coffee table. "Use your mind and your heart," she'd say, tying her gray hair into a knot. "That's a compass your father can't confiscate." When she died 3 years ago, the will named me as the sole heir of the lake house. There were videos of her clear-eyed and steady explaining she didn't want her son to sell the land to people who would carve it into profit. She wanted me to keep what made it a refuge. My father's face went the color of wine left too long in the open air. On the drive home, he accused me of turning his own mother against him, as if I'd staged her entire life. I moved into the lake house the next day and learned the sound of wind weaving through pines on evenings no one else controlled. By then, my career had outgrown the word hobby. I led product at a fast-growing tech company in Seattle, the kind of place where a study room smells like whiteboard markers and espresso, where people talk about shipping dates the way farmers talk about rain. My CEO, Michael Thompson, never once reached for my work and called it luck. He taught me that steady hands can be loud in their own way. which brings us back to the night my father turned a microphone into a blade. I stood slowly, every eye tracking me like a spotlight. The carpet under my heels had a pattern of dark vines and pearl leaves, and for a sliver of a second, I imagined disappearing into that quiet forest. Instead, I crossed the room and took the second microphone the DJ offered, my fingers damp against the cold metal. I looked at Amelia first. Her bouquet trembled just enough to move the ribbon at her wrist. "Congratulations," I said, and mean it because her joy wasn't my enemy. Then I turned to the crowd. "Thank you for celebrating Amelia and Thomas," I began, voice carrying farther than I expected. "There's been a misunderstanding. My grandmother's lake house is my home. I'm not gifting it tonight." The words landed like flat stones across the surface of a still lake. Small splashes clean, ripples spreading fast. You could feel the temperature drop. A murmur swelled and then stopped because no one wanted to be the first to ask what kind of daughter refuses a public script. My father's smile edged into something sharp. He stepped forward, hand light on my elbow like a photographer's pose. A private word, he said through teeth arranged like a commercial. He steered me toward a side hallway lined with framed photographs of past galas and polished donors. The door clicked behind us. Hush, replacing the hum of strings and chatter. "You will not embarrass me," he said, volume low, fury high. The scent of his cologne mixed with scotch and the metal tang of anger. He reached into his jacket and unfolded papers with the practiced flourish of a contract signing. "Sign here and we'll announce properly. Consider it a family consolidation, not a loss." Consolidation, I repeated, because sometimes saying a word helps reveal its weight. It's my house. Grandma left it to me specifically so it wouldn't be sold off. My voice stayed even, the way you speak to a smoke alarm you refuse to touch. He blinked. His gaze flared, then cooled as he calculated angles. "The Wellingtons are builders," he said, wiping at an invisible fleck on his cufflink. "They understand legacy and growth. This is how families secure their future. You will do your part." "You've already promised it," I said, the realization arriving without drama, only clarity. "You gave away something you don't own." He took one step closer, reducing the hallway to the width of his will. "Don't be selfish, Lacey. Don't make me the villain in your little independent story. You want to be part of this family again? You act like it." Something in me aligned then, like a level finally settling between two lines. "I never left," I said. "You just never made room." I let the papers hang between us and watched the edges curl toward his fist. We returned to the ballroom with the lines drawn, though no one could see them. I sat beside my mother, who dabbed her lipsticked glass with a cloth napkin, as if that stain were the important mess. "Smile," she whispered, eyes pinned on the dais. "It's a happy day." "It could be," I said. She didn't respond, but her fingers tightened around the stem until her knuckles went white. The father of the bride toast was always going to be his stage. He lifted his glass again, the room obediently still. He told a sweet story about Amelia's first bicycle, about skinned knees and courage, and even I felt the catch in my throat when she laughed softly into Thomas's shoulder. Then he turned to generosity, to the way families give so the next generation can thrive, and I knew we were about to collide with the version of truth he preferred. He gestured toward me, and the air thinned. People leaned forward the way they do when a magician asks for a volunteer. "Lacey, come share a few words about your gift," he said, as if a second invitation could rewrite the first refusal. My chair scraped softly when I stood. The quartet stilled completely. Even the ice decided it had cracked enough for one evening. "It's a lovely night," I said, because my grandmother had taught me to be gracious before direct. "Amelia, you look radiant. Thomas, welcome to the noise of our family." A small laugh lifted then fell. "But the lake house isn't mine to give away tonight. It belongs to me, and I'm keeping it. Silence can be a sound. This one had weight. It pushed against the ribs and asked whether you were sure. I held my breath and then exhaled slowly, letting the words sit where they landed. Amelia's eyes widened, not hurt, not yet, just confusion turning its head. My father moved so fast, I didn't notice his hand until it was on my arm again, an usher's grip with a bouncer's intent. "We'll finish up in a moment," he told the guests, smile stitched in place. "To the DJ. Music, please." The violinist lifted a bow and then lowered it when we reached the archway. The door closed on a single soft note. In the hallway again, his face lost the light. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he asked, each syllable a measured cut. "Do you understand who you've just embarrassed?" I corrected a lie. I said, "You made a promise about property you don't own." I could hear my voice and my grandmother's voice at once, their braid stronger than either thread. "I won't clean it up for you." His breath went thin. "I've been patient with you," he said, as if patience were a favor I owed interest on. "I've covered for your obstinance. Tonight, you will not humiliate me." "You're doing that on your own," I said. "All I'm doing is saying no." I felt my heart beat steady the way it does when you stop running and decide to plant your feet. He stepped into my space and lowered his voice to that dangerous softness I remembered from childhood after guests left before the lecture began. "Last chance," he said. "Be part of this family or stand alone." For years, I answered, I stood alone in a full house. The truth left my mouth and stayed in the air between us. He saw it land. Something flickered behind his eyes that looked a lot like fear pretending to be anger. The door opened a crack. A waiter slipped past, pretending not to notice anything except the tray balanced on his palm. Jazz leaked softly into the hallway and then quieted as the door sealed again. The building seemed to listen. He reached for the papers one more time, thrust them toward me, and when I didn't take them, he balled them in his hand. The metal corner of a frame caught the light over his shoulder, a school of gold fish darting across the hallway wall. I thought of the lake at dusk, the way cattails hold shadows, the sound of a paddle dipping into still water. My grandmother's porch, the lemon oil, the sound of a clock that only told the truth. "No," I said, and heard how simple strength can sound. "I'm not signing." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Even the air seemed to have taken a seat. Then his jaw tightened. His fist closed. I saw the motion before I understood the meaning, a quick, hard arc of muscle and will. Impact bloomed across the side of my face, white light and ringing like someone dropped a silver platter on marble. My shoulder twisted. The edge of a narrow table rushed up. The corner met my brow with a bright crack. The framed photos to my left wavered like they were underwater. The last thing I registered before the floor rose to meet me was the throb of the bass from the ballroom and Amelia's laugh riding above it, clear, unsuspecting, suspended in a room that still believed this was a happy day. Then the light thinned, the hallway narrowed to a straw, and the chandeliers went out like a row of quiet stars. When I woke, everything was white and humming. The ceiling blurred and swam a thin line of fluorescent light cutting through the haze above me. My head felt packed with cotton and glass. It took a moment to realize the sound I heard was my own heart monitor, a soft, mechanical pulse marking the space between memories. A gentle voice called my name. "Lacey, can you hear me?" It was Jordan seated beside the bed in a chair that looked too small for their worry. Their eyes were red at the corners, hair slightly messy, as if they'd been running their hands through it for hours. "You're at Harborview," they said quietly. "You took a bad hit to the head, but you're safe." I tried to sit up, but the room tilted like a boat. Pain surged behind my temple. The bandage felt tight, and every breath carried the faint scent of antiseptic. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew. The memory flickered the hallway, the swing of his hand, the crack of the table edge, the stars collapsing behind my eyes. My throat tightened. "My father," I whispered. Jordan's jaw flexed. "Yeah," they said. "He hit you, hard enough to knock you out. You've got a concussion and 3 stitches over your brow." They paused, voice dropping. "The doctor said you're lucky it wasn't worse." I watched the curtains sway slightly with the air vent, that small rhythm in an otherwise still room. My mother's absence was louder than any monitor. I hadn't expected her to burst through the door, but a part of me still hoped she might. "Is the wedding still going on?" I asked, though the answer came from the pity in Jordan's eyes. "They're pretending nothing happened," they said flatly. "Your mom told everyone you fainted. I drove you here while the music started again." The words settled like ash. I turned my head toward the window. Evening light spilled over the city gray clouds edged with rose, the kind of sky my grandmother used to call forgiving. It didn't feel forgiving now. "Of course she did," I said quietly. "She's still keeping the peace." A nurse entered, checking my vitals with a practiced smile. "You're alert," she said softly. "That's a good sign. You might have a headache for a while. The doctor will be back to talk about discharge instructions." She hesitated before adding, "The police have been notified. They'll need your statement once you're ready." "Police?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "It's standard procedure," she said gently. "Anytime there's a head injury caused by another person, especially family, we have to report it." The idea hung in the air like something fragile. A lifetime of conditioning made me want to say no to keep it quiet for the sake of appearances. But my reflection in the window, bandaged, bruised, older than I remembered, didn't look like someone who owed silence to anyone. I just nodded. When the nurse left, Jordan leaned forward, elbows on their knees. "There's more," they said carefully. "Michael's been trying to reach you all day. He found out about your father's company, something about the Neuralink bid. Even in the fog of pain, that name cut through." "What about it?" "Apparently, he's been pushing to land a big contract to save his business. But there are issues, fraudulent paperwork, safety violations, bad loans. Michael said it's serious." My pulse quickened. I thought of the conversation I'd overheard on the terrace, my father promising the lake house as if it were already his. The puzzle pieces began to lock together, forming a picture so simple and cruel, it took my breath. The house had never been about family, or even pride. It was leverage collateral for the deal that was supposed to rescue him. "He was going to use it," I murmured. "He was going to use my inheritance to buy his way out." Jordan nodded slowly. "Michael's on his way here. He said he doesn't want you to handle this alone." A quiet knock came a few minutes later, and then Michael stepped inside, still in jeans and a jacket, a far cry from the tailored suits I'd seen him in every day. His expression was strained but kind. "Lacey," he said softly, "I'm so sorry this happened." He pulled a chair close to the bed. "I've been trying to reach you since this morning. We uncovered some irregularities in your father's proposal, cut corners, forged certifications. I was going to reject it Monday, but after what you've been through..." He let the sentence trail off. "We're withdrawing completely. Effective immediately." For a long moment, I just stared at the thin blue blanket folded across my lap. The pattern of the weave blurred as tears filled my eyes. I wasn't crying for the contract or the scandal or even the house. I was crying because the truth was finally standing still in front of me, and it was heavier than I thought. My father's anger, his manipulation, his charm. It all came down to this one thing: control. The lake house was the last piece of his empire he didn't own, and that was intolerable to him. "What happens now?" I asked. Michael's voice was steady. "You rest. You talk to the police. After that, we make sure the truth is heard. Not revenge, just truth. That's the only way forward." The officers arrived not long after. A woman with kind eyes and a younger partner who looked barely 30. They took my statement while Jordan sat nearby recording details in a notebook as if it were their own life at stake. I told them everything: the confrontation, the announcement, the hallway, the blow. My voice stayed calm, each word like a stone placed carefully in order. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, there was no hesitation left in me. "Yes," I said. The word felt clean. After they left, the doctor returned with a clipboard and instructions about rest medication and follow-up visits. "You'll feel disoriented for a while," he warned gently. "But you're strong. You'll recover." When I was finally cleared to leave, the sky outside had darkened to violet. The city's lights shimmered across the wet pavement, reflecting the kind of rain that never fully stopped in Seattle. Michael waited near the entrance with the car keys, Jordan beside him, carrying my bag. The nurse handed me the discharge papers, her eyes warm. "Go home and rest," she said. "You've been through enough." But the word home didn't sit right. The lake house was safe, yes, but part of me knew that silence would harden there too, just like it had in every house my father built. "Not yet," I said, quietly. "I can't let him rewrite this. Not again." In the car, the dashboard lights painted Michael's face in soft amber. "You don't owe anyone a public confrontation," he said. "You could go home, recover, and let the legal process work." I watched the rain slide across the window in silver threads. If I disappear now, he controls the story. Amelia will hear his version. Everyone will. I need them to know what really happened. Jordan turned slightly in the passenger seat. "Then we go back," they said. "But we go smart. You won't be alone this time." We stopped at a small 24-hour pharmacy for my medication. The clerk handed over a white bag with a receipt still warm from the printer. The hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt. It all felt strangely peaceful, like the quiet before a new kind of storm. Back in the car, Michael outlined what he knew about my father's finances. Anderson Development was drowning in debt. He'd mortgaged nearly everything, even the house my parents lived in. "The Wellington's Bank is his biggest lender," he said. "He was probably hoping to use your property to secure another extension. Without it, he's done." I stared out at the blurred glow of passing headlights. So the lake house wasn't a gift for Amelia. It was a lifeline for him. "Exactly," Michael said. "And he dressed it up as family unity because that's how he operates." The words didn't come with anger anymore, just a calm sort of understanding. I finally saw him clearly, not as the father I'd tried to win over, but as the man my grandmother had warned me about in her quiet way. Control wasn't his flaw. It was his language. By the time we reached the hotel where the reception was still underway, the night had thickened into mist. Laughter drifted faintly through the glass doors, muffled by music. I caught my reflection in the window, bandaged brow, pale skin, the faint purple bloom of a bruise at my temple. I looked like someone who'd walked through fire and wasn't sure what to call herself afterward. "Are you certain?" Michael asked quietly. I nodded. "If I don't speak, he'll use my silence as proof I was wrong." We stepped inside. The music faltered as people turned. The soft thump of bass lingered mismatched to the stunned hush that followed. My mother froze mid-conversation, a napkin still in her hand. Amelia's head turned, and I saw her face register confusion, then alarm. My father stood near the bar laughing too loudly with Thomas's father, a man who knew the value of a handshake more than the truth behind it. The air shifted when he saw me. Color drained from his face as Michael came into view behind me. "Lacey," he said, voice smooth as ever. "You should be resting. This is hardly the time." I took one step closer, the sound of my shoes against the marble louder than I expected. "You're right," I said, but I couldn't rest, knowing everyone here believes a lie. The music died completely. The conversation stopped. My mother's lips parted in a silent plea. Jordan moved a little closer, phone discreetly raised in their hand, recording. I could feel the trembling in my knees, but my voice stayed steady. "Dad didn't tell you the truth," I said, looking at Amelia. "He promised you the lake house as a gift, but it isn't his to give. It's mine, and he tried to take it by force." A wave of murmurs rippled through the guests, followed by a fragile quiet. My father's smile hardened into something unfamiliar, the mask cracking one muscle at a time. "She's confused," he said to the crowd. "She's had a terrible accident and—" "Accident," I cut in. "You hit me. I woke up in a hospital. The police have my statement." Gasps moved through the room like wind across water. Even Amelia's bouquet seemed to wilt between her fingers. Michael stepped forward, his tone even and professional. "James, this isn't the place to spin another story. I'm Michael Thompson, CEO of Neuralink Solutions. We were evaluating your bid, but after what's come to light today, that partnership ends now." The color drained completely from my father's face. His world built on control and perception began to crumble one whisper at a time. And still beneath the hum of shock and disbelief, I felt something else rising. Not triumph, but an unsteady kind of peace. For the first time in years, the silence in a room full of family didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. The lights above the dance floor glowed soft gold, turning the edges of the moment into something almost sacred. I didn't know what would come next, only that the spell of obedience had broken, and whatever followed would have to face the truth left standing in its place. For a moment, no one moved. The music had stopped, leaving only the hum of the chandelier lights and the soft hiss of air conditioning against the velvet walls. My father's smile had frozen halfway between charm and fury, and his eyes darted from me to Michael to the guests watching from their linen-covered tables. It was the kind of silence that strips everything away, the pretense, the polish, the story everyone thought they were living. Amelia was the first to break it. Her voice trembled small and sharp all at once. "Dad, is that true?" She looked from him to me, the question hanging between us like something fragile and heavy. My father lifted his glass, but his hand shook. "Your sister's confused," he said finally, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like one. "She's been through a lot. It's her head injury talking." He reached toward me as if he could fix the entire scene by rearranging my posture. "Lacey, sit down. You're making this worse." Michael's voice came steady clear. "No, James. You've done enough." He stepped forward just enough to command the room without raising his tone. "When a man assaults his daughter to gain a property he doesn't own, and then lies about it for profit, it's not confusion. It's character." A few people gasped softly, the kind of sound that breaks in polite circles only when something true finally shows up. The Wellington patriarch's face hardened, his lips tightening in a thin, deliberate line. My father's attempt at composure cracked like old plaster. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "This is family business." "Then handle it like family," Michael replied. "Apologize to your daughter and stop treating her inheritance like a bargaining chip." I watched the words land, saw the flicker of calculation behind my father's eyes. He realized then what I already knew: there was no graceful way out. His empire was built on the illusion of control, and that illusion was crumbling right there between the champagne glasses and the cameras in people's hands. Amelia set her bouquet down carefully on the table. "Dad," she said, her voice steadier now, "is any of this true? About the deal, about you promising my house as collateral?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward her with that same commanding tilt of his head he'd used all our lives when he wanted silence. "Not here, Amelia. We'll talk later." Her hand trembled, but she didn't look away. "No," she said softly. "We'll talk now." That was when the first ripple of whispers began moving through the room. People leaned in close to each other, covering their mouths, their eyes fixed on the center of the unfolding scene. I stood completely still. My bandage itched, and every pulse of my heartbeat made the side of my face throb, but I held my ground. My father's attention snapped back to me. "You've ruined this night," he said through clenched teeth. "You couldn't let your sister have her moment, could you? Always needing to be the victim." It was an old wound, one I thought had scarred over years ago. But now, standing under the chandelier's pale light, I realized something. His anger no longer frightened me. It exhausted me. "I didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "You did when you turned love into leverage." Jordan stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, their voice calm but firm. "I was there, Mr. Anderson. I saw her on the floor. You didn't just lose your temper, you knocked her unconscious." The whispering turned to open murmurs now. The Wellington patriarch cleared his throat, calling his financial advisor over. My mother's eyes darted between them all, her hands twisting the napkin in her lap into a frayed knot. "James," she murmured, "please stop." But he couldn't stop. Years of pride and denial had nowhere else to go. "You all think you're better than me," he shouted, suddenly, his voice echoing off the marble. "I built this family from nothing. Every dollar, every opportunity, every roof over your head's mine. And this is how you repay me." Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You don't build a family by owning it," he said. "You build it by loving it." It was the calmest sentence in the room, and somehow it carried farther than any shout could. Thomas, standing beside Amelia, looked toward his father. "Mr. Wellington," he said evenly, "I think it's time you hear the truth about Anderson Development." My father froze. "Thomas," he warned, but Thomas didn't back down. "He's been trying to use the lake house as collateral for his loans," he said to the room. "Without it, he can't repay the debt he owes our bank." The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. This time, it was silence again, but the kind that comes when something undeniable has landed. My father's hand twitched at his side, fingers curling slightly, as if still holding the ghost of a signature. Michael stepped forward once more, his expression unreadable. "For the record," he said, "Neurolink Solutions will not be partnering with Anderson Development. The bid has been formally rejected." That was the moment it ended the last thread of his power snapping in the still air. My father's face drained of color. His hand went to his collar as if it were too tight, but the truth was simpler than that. His authority, his control, his reputation, they were all unraveling, and he knew it. "You're ruining me," he whispered, his voice rough and hoarse. "After everything I've done for this family." I took a slow breath. "You did that yourself," I said. "I'm just refusing to hide it anymore." He lunged toward me, then the old fury surging back, but this time, Thomas and Jordan stepped between us. The motion drew the attention of the two police officers who had been quietly standing at the door since my call earlier that evening. They moved forward quickly, their presence a calm but unmistakable line. "James Anderson," one of them said. "We need to speak with you about an assault reported earlier today." My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. He turned to my mother, but for the first time in my life, she didn't move to his side. She just sat there, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly on the tablecloth. "James," she said quietly, "I can't." The officers led him away, the crowd parting like water around a sinking stone. When the doors closed behind them, the noise that filled the room was not applause or chatter. It was the faint clinking of glasses, the restless movement of people realizing they'd witnessed the collapse of something once untouchable. Amelia approached me slowly. The lace of her gown brushed the floor like a whisper. Her mascara had smudged a small streak tracing the side of her cheek. She looked at my bandage, then at my eyes. "Did he really?" "Yes," I said simply. She pressed her lips together, nodding once. "I didn't know," she whispered. "All these years I believed him when he said you were the problem. I thought you were the one who pulled away." "We were both raised to believe his version of things," I said. "You just learned to survive it differently." She reached out, then her hand trembling as it touched mine. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something fragile and real. A beginning. Thomas came up beside her. "We're ending the reception," he said quietly. "It doesn't feel right to go on." He glanced at Michael, then at the guests still whispering near the walls. "Thank you for standing up when we couldn't." I nodded, my throat tight. Around us, the Wellington staff began quietly clearing the tables, their movements soft and careful, like people leaving a chapel after a funeral. Michael turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You did what you had to do," he said. "Not everyone could have done that." "I didn't feel brave," I said, "just tired." "That's often what courage feels like," he replied. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. Rain had started again, fine and misting, settling gently over the city lights. The sound of it on the pavement was steady, like breathing. Jordan walked beside me to the car, their umbrella tilted just enough to shield us both. "You okay?" they asked softly. I didn't answer right away. The quiet between us felt thick with exhaustion and something lighter than relief, but heavier than grief. "I will be," I said finally. "Just not tonight." At the curb, I glanced back once at the ballroom's tall windows. Inside, the lights glowed warm against the glass, and through them, I saw Amelia still standing by the empty dance floor, her white dress reflecting the chandelier's gold. For the first time, she looked like herself, not the version our father had shaped for the world. The city stretched beyond her, quiet, endless, and waiting. As we drove away, the rain gathered in small rivers along the windshield. I leaned my head back against the seat, letting the rhythm wash over me. Somewhere deep down beneath the ache and fatigue, something new was forming, a sense that the story I'd been born into had ended, and the one I would choose for myself was just beginning. The next morning would bring police reports, statements, fallout in every possible direction. But for that moment, driving through the sleeping city with people who had stayed when it mattered, I felt a strange stillness take root. Not peace, exactly, but the space where peace begins. The rain didn't stop for 2 days after the wedding. It swept through Seattle in long silver sheets, softening everything. It touched the rooftops, the docks, the noise. I stayed mostly at the lake house, drifting between the steady hum of the fire and the hush of water against the shore. My bruises had begun to fade from deep violet to a pale yellow, but the ache behind my temples still pulsed when I turned my head too quickly. Every morning, I brewed coffee on the old gas stove, the same way my grandmother used to slow and patient waiting for the scent to fill the kitchen before pouring. I found myself listening for her voice, that calm steadiness that once guided me through smaller storms. The house had her still tucked into the grain of the wood and the rhythm of the clock she'd wound every night before bed. On the third morning, my phone buzzed against the counter. It was Amelia. Her message was short, just a request to talk. I stared at it for a long time, watching the screen dim, then light again. Finally, I typed back. Dinner tomorrow. Here. When she arrived the next evening, the rain had turned to mist. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a long gray coat, her hair pulled back her face, pale in the dim porch light. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, but also something else, resolve maybe. The kind that takes time to find. Inside, I'd set the table the way Grandma used to when she wanted to make peace, thick pottery plates, folded linen napkins, and a small vase of lake reeds and wildflowers. Amelia ran her hand along the edge of the table, smiling faintly. It smells the same, she said. Like coffee and cedar. It always does, I said. For a while, we just ate quietly. She picked at her food, tracing the rim of her glass, then set her fork down. I wanted to see you face to face, she said. To say, I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. The words hung in the air between us, honest and trembling. I believed him, she said softly. All those years, every story he told about you being difficult or selfish. I took his side without even thinking. It was easier than questioning him. She looked up, her eyes bright. I should have protected you. You were my sister, and I didn't even see what he was doing. I exhaled slowly. We both lived under the same rules, I said. We just learned different ways to survive them. Her lip quivered, and she nodded. Thomas has been incredible, she said. He keeps reminding me that what happened wasn't our fault. But I still wake up some nights thinking about that moment, how I didn't move. How I just stood there, watching him grab you. I reached across the table and took her hand. You moved now, I said quietly. That's what matters. We talked until the fire burned low, sharing stories that had been hidden under years of silence. By the time she left, the mist had lifted from the water, and the stars were faint, but visible again. Before she drove away, she hugged me long and hard, whispering, I don't want him to be the end of our story. After she left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching her taillights disappear through the trees. The house felt different, less like a fortress, more like a beginning. 2 weeks later, my mother called. Her voice was tentative, careful the way it always got when she wasn't sure how I'd respond. Lacey, she said, can we talk? I agreed, though part of me didn't know what there was left to say. When she arrived, she looked older than I remembered her, makeup lighter, her clothes simpler. She carried a small leather notebook, the edges worn. I started therapy, she said as soon as we sat down. It was part of what the counselor recommended after. She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she opened the notebook and held it out. She told me to write down every time I made excuses for your father. I filled 17 pages. I didn't take the book, but I saw the faint tremor in her hand. That's a lot of pages, I said softly. She nodded. More than I thought I had in me to admit. She looked around the house, the framed photographs, the light spilling through the windows. Your grandmother saw something in you that I didn't. I was too afraid to stand beside you. Too afraid of him. The confession sat between us like a fragile gift. For the first time in my life, she didn't try to explain herself, or defend him, or smooth anything over. She just told the truth. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. She took a breath, slow and unsteady. "I've moved into an apartment downtown," she said. I filed for separation. I don't know what's next, but I'm done pretending. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mother, the same woman who once told me not to rock the boat, had finally stepped off it. We spent the afternoon walking along the dock. The water was still the air crisp and full of cedar and damp earth. When we reached the edge, she stopped and looked out at the lake. "She would be proud of you," she said quietly. "So would she of you," I replied. The court process moved faster than I expected. My father's legal team reached out through his attorney, hoping to negotiate a plea deal. He'd already lost the business banks had withdrawn their contracts, and former partners were suing for unpaid debts. The district attorney's office asked whether I wanted to push for the maximum sentence. I thought about it for a long time. In the end, I told them I would support a plea arrangement with conditions: anger management, mandatory therapy, restitution for the medical bills, and community service. "I don't want to destroy him," I said to the prosecutor. "I just want him to face the truth." When the agreement was finalized, I didn't attend the hearing. I stayed at the lake house instead, sitting on the porch, as the late autumn sun turned the water copper and gold. Somewhere out there, he was hearing a judge sentence him to probation classes and restitution. It wasn't victory I felt. It was release. Michael called that evening. "It's done," he said simply. "You made the right choice." "I hope so," I said. "You did," he replied. "Integrity doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's just a quiet night that feels a little lighter than the one before." The following weeks blurred into small, steady steps forward. I went back to work, easing into my routine. Michael promoted me to Executive Director of Product Innovation, saying it was less about reward and more about trust. Jordan insisted on celebrating with takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. To surviving family drama, they said raising their glass, and to building something that's actually ours. We laughed, and for the first time, it felt like the laughter stayed. Winter came early to the lake. Thin ice formed at the edges of the dock, crackling softly when the morning sun touched it. The house, once filled with tension and memory, had turned into something else, something peaceful. Amelia and Thomas visited, often helping me restore the boathouse and replant the garden. My mother came once for tea, quiet, but present, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile as if it anchored her to the new life she was learning to live. The lake house had become what my grandmother always wanted it to be, a place where love wasn't conditional and truth didn't cost anyone their peace. One night, as I closed the shutters, I caught my reflection in the window. The faint scar above my eyebrow was the only mark left from that night, but it no longer looked like something to hide. It looked like proof that silence can break and survive its own echo. The phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Amelia. "Still. Okay if we come by tomorrow? Thomas wants to bring his parents this time. They'd like to see the place." I smiled, typing back, "Of course. The guest rooms are ready." Outside, the wind moved through the pines, carrying the scent of cold water and the promise of spring somewhere beyond the fog. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the fire behind me. The house exhaled, as if it had been holding its breath for years. As I stood on the porch, the lake spread out before me, quiet, unbroken, and endless. It wasn't forgiveness, I felt not exactly. It was something gentler, something closer to peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to rewrite the past and start living what's left of it. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called once, then again. And I thought of my grandmother's words, whispered long ago under a sky just like this one. Real family is the kind that helps you become yourself. The water caught the moonlight then, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe she'd been right. The morning after Amelia's message, the lake was glass. Mist hung just above the surface, shifting gently in the early light, like breath over a mirror. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee warming my hands, the old wind chime clinking softly behind me. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Everything felt still, almost reverent, as if the world itself had paused to listen. I could hear a car engine far down the road before I saw the headlights. A few minutes later, Amelia's silver SUV appeared between the trees, followed by another car, the Wellingtons. I rose and straightened the woven throw over the porch bench, not out of nerves, but from habit. The gravel crunched under their tires, a sound that once might have quickened my heart. Today, it didn't. When they stepped out, Thomas's parents approached first. His mother, a woman with soft gray eyes and the quiet grace of someone who has seen too many seasons come and go, offered her hand. "Thank you for welcoming us, Lacey," she said. "Amelia's told us how much this place means to you." "It means a lot to all of us now," I said. "I'm glad you're here." Inside, the air held the familiar scent of cedar and roasted vegetables. I'd spent the morning cooking rosemary chicken potatoes and a pan of bread still cooling on the counter. My grandmother used to say that good food softened even the hardest truth. Maybe she was right. The conversation began cautiously small talk about the drive to the lake the unseasonably warm afternoon. Then Amelia found her rhythm, explaining how she and Thomas were settling into their new home, how she'd started volunteering at a local mentorship program for young women entering finance. "It feels good to do something that isn't about numbers," she said. "Something that feels human." Her words caught me by surprise, not because they were unusual, but because they carried a sincerity I hadn't heard in her voice since we were kids. Thomas listened quietly beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. After lunch, the Wellingtons walked down to the dock with Thomas leaving Amelia and me in the kitchen. She began stacking plates, her movements unhurried. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she looked up. "Dad sent me a letter," she said. I froze halfway through drying a dish. "What did he say?" "He's trying," she said carefully. "Therapy, anger management, community service. He says he understands now how far he went. He asked about you." I set the towel down and leaned against the counter. I don't know what I'd even say to him. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. "You just needed to hear it." The wind shifted outside, brushing through the open window. I could almost imagine his voice in it, still proud, still wounded, but smaller somehow. "If he's learning, that's something," I said. She nodded. "Mom talks to him once a week through the counselor. She's not going back, but she's trying to end things with some dignity." I smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." Amelia's expression softened. "She told me she's proud of you," she said. "She said you were the first one brave enough to stop pretending." The words landed with unexpected weight. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them. Later, after they left, the house settled into its quiet again. The echo of laughter from the porch faded, replaced by the low hum of cicadas. I walked down to the dock and sat where the planks met the water, the boards warm from the afternoon sun. My reflection shimmered faintly on the surface, a woman I recognized, and didn't all at once. I thought about everything that had led me here, the fear, the silence, the nights when I questioned my own worth. For so long, I'd measured my strength by how well I endured. But sitting there watching the ripples catch the last of the light, I realized endurance was only the beginning. True strength was knowing when to stop carrying what was never mine to bear. A loon called somewhere across the lake, its voice carrying over the still water. I felt an odd peace then, deep and quiet, like the pause between waves. The following month, Michael visited the lake house for the first time. He stood on the porch, taking in the view, the tall pines leaning toward the water. "Your grandmother had good instincts," he said. "This place feels like a heartbeat." I smiled. She built it to outlast noise. He nodded, his expression softening. "You know there's a conference next spring in Portland. Tech Innovation and Leadership. I'd like you to speak there about ethics, growth, and resilience. I think people need to hear your voice." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The idea of standing on a stage used to terrify me. But now, the fear felt smaller, distant. "I'll think about it," I said. That's all I wanted to hear. He smiled, then looked toward the lake. "You've come a long way, Lacey." When he left, I stood watching his car wind down the gravel road until it disappeared into the trees. The wind picked up scattering golden leaves across the water. That evening, Jordan stopped by with 2 cups of hot cider and a grin that carried years of friendship. "You survived the storm," they said, handing me a cup. "I'm still here," I said. "Maybe that's the point." We sat by the fire pit, the crackle filling the spaces where words weren't needed. The flames painted the edges of the lake in amber light, flickering against the darkening sky. Jordan leaned back and sighed. "You know, they said if Grandma Catherine could see you now, she'd probably say, 'Told you she'd break the mold.'" I laughed quietly. She'd also remind me to bring in the cushions before it rains. We stayed there until the stars came out clear and endless, their reflections scattered across the lake like scattered glass. Somewhere deep inside, I felt a shift, not sharp or dramatic, but steady. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. It was about reclamation of truth, a voice of peace. When Jordan left, I lingered by the dock. The night was cool, the air filled with the scent of pine and smoke. I could see the lights of the neighboring houses across the lake, small and distant like quiet prayers. Inside, I walked through each room, slowly touching the wooden door frames, the smooth banister, the worn pages of the books my grandmother once kept by her chair. The house no longer felt haunted by what happened. It felt claimed, steady under my feet. Before turning in, I stepped outside one last time. The moon was rising over the ridge, its light soft and golden. The water caught it perfectly, holding it still, as if the lake itself wanted to remember. Standing there, I thought of the last words my grandmother wrote in the letter that came with her will. "May this house always remind you that love, when it's real, never asks you to surrender yourself to deserve it." I understood that now. Love wasn't blind loyalty or silence. It was choosing peace without losing who you are. I stayed there until the chill settled in the kind that carries you gently toward the next morning. Then I went inside, the floor creaking softly beneath me, and closed the door with a quiet click. Some wounds, I've learned, don't fade because we forgive, they fade because we finally stop feeding them. And when that happens, peace doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives like dawn, slow, certain, and entirely your own. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you believe in healing that comes without hate, share this story with someone who needs a little light today. Thank you for spending this time with me. May you find your own quiet peace wherever you are.